Brian Carter, 52, thought nothing could be more ordinary than screwing in a doorbell camera outside his suburban Ohio home. He had worked 30 years in property management, and safety was second nature. But by the next morning, trouble arrived in heels. HOA President Sophia Blackstone marched up his porch, clipboard clutched like a weapon. Her smile didn't hide the venom in her voice. "Remove that camera immediately. It violates community standards." Brian's grip tightened on the screwdriver still in his hand. "It's my front door, Sophia. I'm protecting my family, not spying on yours." The neighbors froze at their mailboxes, watching sparks fly. For the first time in years, Brian realized the real threat wasn't burglars. It was the people claiming to manage his neighborhood. 2 days later, Brian's mailbox looked like a courtroom. Envelope after envelope stamped "Notice of Violation," each piling fines on his security cameras. Within a week, the amount ballooned past $5,000. Sophia's board wasn't playing fair. They were drowning him in paperwork designed to suffocate. Standing on his porch, he ripped one of the letters in half, letting it fall in the wind as neighbors whispered from across the street. His wife Diane stepped outside, her voice trembling. "Brian, maybe you should just take them down." He looked at her, weary but unyielding. "If I give in now, Diane, they'll own us forever." Behind the closed curtains, he could see board members watching, phones raised, documenting every move. The war had begun, and Brian knew he couldn't retreat.
The HOA's arrogance reached a breaking point at a Tuesday night meeting. Brian, sitting quietly in the back, watched Board Secretary Alan Foster slip outside. Minutes later, his phone buzzed. Live feed from his remaining camera showed Alan unscrewing it from the wall. The entire act caught in crisp HD. Brian stormed through the meeting room doors, phone raised high. "Care to explain why your people are stealing my property?" Gasps filled the room as he replayed the footage for everyone to see. Alan, wrench in hand, pocketing the camera like a thief. Sophia tried to keep composure. "This meeting is private." Brian's voice cut like steel. "Private? You broke into my home and ripped down my camera. Now the whole neighborhood can see who's breaking the law." The room fell into chaos. By the end of the month, the numbers were staggering. $15,000. That's how much the HOA now claimed Brian owed for his camera violations. They issued threats of property liens, foreclosure possibilities, and legal costs that could bury him alive. Sitting at his kitchen table, Brian stared at the stack of notices, while his teenage daughter, Emily, placed her hand on his arm. "Dad, why are they doing this to us?" His jaw clenched, his eyes wet with anger. "Because we stood up to them, sweetheart, and people like this can't stand being told no." Outside, HOA members strolled past his home in a coordinated parade, whispering and pointing at his windows. It wasn't just about cameras anymore. It was intimidation, psychological warfare, and Brian knew the next strike was coming.
That strike came on the very day Brian was supposed to start over. After months of torment, he had found a buyer for his house, his chance to walk away and escape. He sat at the title office, pen ready, when the agent slid a sheet across the desk, her face pale. "Mr. Carter, there's a lien on your property from the HOA." His chest tightened as the buyer quietly gathered his papers and walked out. His wife buried her face in her hands. The home sale was dead before it began. Brian stood frozen, the enormity crashing down. The HOA had timed their move perfectly, sabotaging his only chance at freedom. Outside the office, Sophia's car idled at the curb, and through the glass, Brian saw her smirk as if victory already belonged to her. That night, Brian sat in his darkened living room, the glow of his laptop painting his face in pale blue. He pored through HOA bylaws, state statutes, and property codes until his eyes burned. Every clause he read confirmed what he already knew. The fines were inflated, the lien was weaponized, and the board had overstepped its authority. But knowing it and proving it were different battles. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from an anonymous number. "Give up now, Brian. You'll lose everything." He slammed the phone onto the table. Diane whispered from the hallway, her voice cracking. "They're destroying us. Maybe we should let it go." Brian stood, fists trembling. "No.
They came after my family. I'm not letting bullies decide how we live.
The next morning, while Bryan loaded tools into his truck, his neighbor, retired accountant Tom Jenkins, approached. Tom lowered his voice, glancing around as if the street had ears. "Bryan, you're not wrong. I've seen their books. Something isn't adding up." He handed Bryan a thumb drive. "Audits don't lie. They've been funneling money into shell accounts." Bryan blinked, stunned. "You mean they're stealing?" Tom nodded grimly. "Every dollar of your fines went somewhere it shouldn't." The weight of proof burned in Bryan's pocket as he realized this wasn't just about cameras. This was organized theft. For the first time, he felt the tide shift, not because of his fight alone, but because someone else was finally willing to stand beside him. At the next HOA meeting, Bryan walked in with his laptop bag slung over his shoulder, calm but coiled like a spring. Sophia smirked at him from the head of the table, board members at her side. "Back again, Mr. Carter? Come to pay your fines?" she sneered. Bryan plugged the thumb drive into the projector without a word. The screen lit up with spreadsheets, transfers, and balances. Tens of thousands missing from community funds. Gasps rippled across the room as numbers scrolled across the wall. Bryan's voice was measured, deadly quiet. "This is where your money went. Not into landscaping, not into security, into their pockets." Sophia slammed her palm on the table. "This meeting is adjourned." But the crowd was already erupting, neighbors shouting, cell phones filming, proof too loud to ignore.
The board's polished facade cracked within hours. Residents flooded Bryan's porch, demanding answers, demanding action. Sophia arrived in a huff, body tense, lawyer in tow. She tried to regain control, her tone icy. "Bryan, you've crossed the line. Publishing stolen documents is a crime." Bryan met her stare without blinking. "And looting the community isn't?" His voice carried across the street, sharp enough to cut glass. The lawyer raised a hand, trying to calm the tension, but the residents weren't listening. They were shouting over each other now, accusations, betrayals, demands for resignations. Sophia's once unyielding power was slipping like sand through her fingers, and Bryan could see it. For the first time, she wasn't in command. She was cornered. The HOA called for an emergency vote, one that could expel Bryan from the community altogether. The gymnasium overflowed with residents, folding chairs scraping against polished floors as the crowd filled every corner. Bryan stood alone at the front, voice steady though his hands shook at his sides. "You tried to silence me with fines. You tried to destroy my family with liens. And when that didn't work, you stole from every single person in this room. I won't back down." Sophia rose, her heels clicking like gunshots on the hardwood floor. "This is our community, Bryan. We decide who belongs here." He leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. "No, Sophia, the law decides, and I've brought it with me." The room erupted, cheers, outrage, fear, every emotion boiling at once. The following morning, the county auditor's office confirmed what Bryan and Tom already suspected. Over $120,000 in HOA funds had been siphoned into untraceable accounts. The news spread like wildfire, neighbors whispering on porches, the local paper calling it Sunset Ridge's hidden heist. Bryan sat at his kitchen table with Tom, the weight of vindication mixing with exhaustion. Diane poured coffee, her eyes finally carrying a spark of hope. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door. Sophia's voice barked from outside, trembling with fury. "You think this changes anything? You've embarrassed us, but you haven't won." Bryan yanked the door open, standing inches from her. "It's not embarrassment, Sophia, it's exposure, and you can't hide anymore." At the next community assembly, Sophia tried to rally support. She stood tall at the microphone, hair perfectly styled, voice dripping with defiance. "Neighbors, this is all a misunderstanding. Records taken out of context. Don't let one bitter man destroy what we've built." Murmurs rippled across the crowd, some nodding, others shaking their heads. Bryan stepped forward, holding up a copy of the auditor's findings. His voice rang with clarity. "This isn't my opinion. These are state-certified records. Every dollar stolen is listed here. Every lie has been accounted for." Residents gasped, phones recording, evidence undeniable. Sophia's composure faltered, beads of sweat shining beneath the bright gymnasium lights. For the first time, the crowd wasn't with her,
They were with him. Humiliated, Sophia struck back with venom. That same night, Bryan's tires were slashed and his mailbox shattered with a baseball bat. He found a note taped to his front door. Drop it or lose more than money. Diane's hands trembled as she read it. Bryan, this is getting dangerous. He put an arm around her shoulders, voice steady but hard. They want fear. We'll give them facts. He drove straight to the police station, slapping the note onto the officer's desk. You want proof of harassment? Here it is. The officer looked at him gravely. Mr. Carter, this isn't just an HOA squabble anymore. This is criminal, and it's time we treat it that way. Weeks later, the case landed in county court. The room buzzed with tension as Sophia sat beside her attorney, jaw clenched, eyes sharp as blades. Bryan took the stand, his voice steady as he explained how fines had ballooned into fabricated liens, how cameras were ripped off his walls, how the board had sabotaged his home sale. The lawyer scoffed. Mr. Carter, are you suggesting an entire board of respected citizens conspired against you? Bryan locked eyes with Sophia, then turned to the jury. I'm not suggesting it, I'm proving it. He lifted a folder, the audit report inside. The judge leaned forward, intrigued, as whispers filled the courtroom.
Under cross-examination, Sophia's confidence cracked. Her attorney tried to redirect, but Bryan's lawyer pressed hard. Mrs. Blackstone, can you explain the $12,400 wire transfer to an account under your maiden name? Silence stretched across the courtroom. Sophia's lips parted, then shut, her face pale. The judge's gavel struck once. Answer the question. Sophia's voice finally broke, thin as paper. I don't recall. Gasps echoed. Her polished armor had fractured in front of everyone. Bryan sat back, heart pounding as the tide shifted fully in his favor. The truth wasn't just coming out, it was swallowing the board whole. As Sophia stammered on the witness stand, Betty, Bryan's longtime neighbor, rose from the back row. Your Honor, may I speak? The judge allowed it, and Betty's voice carried across the silent room. I watched Bryan build his shed, his garden, and yes, install those cameras to protect Diane after her health scare. He isn't breaking rules, he's protecting his family. Sophia knew it. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Diane gripped Bryan's hand, tears forming as their small act of defense had finally gained validation. Sophia stared down, unable to meet Betty's eyes, her arrogance shrinking into shame.
One by one, other residents began to testify. Tom, Maria, even Frank, a former board member. Each described bogus fines, intimidation tactics, and lies Sophia had spun for years. The judge leaned forward, brow furrowed, as the weight of collective testimony crushed Sophia's defense. Her attorney whispered frantically, but Sophia only glared, nails digging into the table. Bryan watched, equal parts exhausted and satisfied, as her empire of fear collapsed in real time. You built this house of cards on threats, Bryan muttered under his breath, and now it's falling exactly the way it should. When the jury returned, the room held its breath. The foreman's words landed like thunder. We find the HOA board guilty of fraudulent practices, harassment, and unlawful interference with property rights. Applause broke out before the judge's gavel restored order. Sophia sank into her chair, pale, trembling, her once sharp tongue silenced. The judge's ruling was swift. Liens erased, damages paid, and the board dissolved effective immediately. Bryan and Diane clung to each other, relief washing over them. Sophia glanced back once, her eyes hollow, as if realizing too late the cost of her greed.
Weeks later, Sophia sat alone on her porch, reporters long gone, her luxury car repossessed, her queen bee status gone with it. She watched neighbors pass without acknowledgement, the same people she once ruled now turning their backs. Diane passed by with Bryan, carrying fresh tomatoes from their garden. He paused, meeting Sophia's gaze. For the first time, she whispered, I was wrong. Bryan gave a slow nod but said nothing, his silence heavier than words. The regret on her face told the whole story. She had lost not just power, but respect, trust, and the community itself. Under new leadership, the community voted to reform the HOA with transparency and accountability. Bryan's name was cleared, his cameras reinstalled without objection, his property rights secured. At the first community barbecue, Diane laughed with neighbors while Bryan flipped burgers, finally at peace. Betty raised her glass. To standing up when it matters. Cheers erupted, laughter filling the air. Bryan looked around at faces free from fear, the shadow of Sophia's reign gone. The narrator's tone slowed with gravity. Justice isn't revenge. It's when truth outlives the lies, and those who abused power are left with nothing but regret.